All right. Well, it's been a while. I know it took a long time getting another one out, but there's another installment of my series on comic penciling, and it's really mostly just the storytelling process. But I finally got back to doing another video. It's on the same set of pages that we were working on last time. I'm actually finished with them now, but I'm just now getting out the videos to go with them. And I was trying to come up with topics to talk about as I go through these pages. And I know I've gone through working with layers and refining your designs as you're going along. I've talked about um, the benefits of working digitally in the first episode, and the pros of working digitally for inking in particular. And I think this time I wanted to do something just a little bit different, back to something more in line with the storytelling part of it, which is the major part of what you're trying to come across and show in comics is the story. So I wanted to get back to this part of it. So what I'm working on right now is the second page. In the last video we did the top panel, the first panel, which was a bunch of the high-speed racing bikes at the starting line, and then there's a panel right after that shows the main character getting on the bike, and right after he does that he looks over and he sees one of the opponents, and all these opponents are android racers, and they're mindless, but they're also really good at what they do. And I wanted them to be creepy and intimidating, and so that's what I'm working on right here. So before I get into the storytelling bits, which I want to talk about, as I'm working on this one android's face, it was important to me to, like I said, try to make him look not scary, but it's make it apparent that it didn't have a mind. And the easiest way to do that was not to give it a face. And so I had this idea early on in which I'd have his opponent racer android beings, instead of having external controls, they would actually plug in like a USB stick into a computer. So I thought the coolest thing I could do was, the most central part of anybody's body is the face, and it's the most expressive. So I wanted it to be the most important part of their character as well. So what I'm doing here is making a bunch of circuitry, and just like we have features on our face, I want to put the same kind of features, not the same kind of features, but the same kind of detail and intricacy into the face. That way your eyes automatically drawn there, and you can tell that it's a very important part of the design. So that's exactly what I'm doing. I'm just adding shapes and trying to make it look interesting, and at the same time randomized, because the things we recognize about a person's face is the symmetry and the proportion. So the more I strayed away from that, the better, really, as I went along here. And this kind of ties into the storytelling part, where since I wanted the opponent to have such a high like an intimidation factor, this was important to the story, not only for the design but also for what I wanted the reader to feel as they're looking at him. Just that it's an alien thing, and no one's ever really done this in real life, and that's exactly how the character's feeling. So originally I had this panel work a different way, and it was more shadowy, and you couldn't really tell what it was. It was almost a mystery, but I decided to go with a clear view of what's in this creature android's face, and that's kind of leading into the whole basis of this video, which is making your storytelling changes as you go. And it's okay to make these changes, as in anything between, you don't want to make changes as far as like complete 180s in your story, but anything to make the story flow better on the page, it's going to be a good thing, because you're not always going to be able to have the foresight to see exactly what you want to do in the layout stage when you're doing your thumbnails, and a lot of the time you're not going to be able to feel the flow, and as you go you might feel the emotion that maybe it's not as powerful in certain panels, and it's not as subtle in other panels. So in this one I wanted to be striking, so I decided to make the features of this android, you know, the focus of the panel, instead of like a mysterious darkness. And there's a full shot of the page. You can see where we're at. It's like technically the fourth panel. So as I said, it's okay to make changes as you go, and these techniques are all found in different resources. You know, if you want to learn how to storytell better, there's plenty of resources, like DC's got a book that goes through pretty much the basics of storytelling. I know there's one for Marvel as well, and Scott McCloud is probably the best resource. He's got 2 books that are pretty much a Bible, and if you want to have kind of the best resource for the potential of comics, go to his books. And so I'm not going to get into like maybe the specifics of techniques in storytelling, you know, why I did what in this video. Just wanted to show some examples of what I changed and why I changed them. So basically that first panel, or not the first panel on the page, but the first one I showed here, I changed for the specific reason for the intimidation and to have a clarity of the enemy, and I think that was important. And the one I'm working on right now is a part where not much has changed, so I'm just really refining the design to make it look right. The only thing I'm changing is pretty much a physical representation of him, this android, like plugging into the bike. So I needed a way to do that, and I wanted, like, as you can see, I put in maybe little puffs of smoke or like steam, or even though it's not realistic, but really it's just like an exaggeration to show the plug-in and its impact. And the rest is all just kind of ad-libbing with design as I go, and making things look a little better than my rough pencils. And they're not super rough, but you know, I was going a certain direction with the pencils, and I was trying to match more of what I had in the previous panel. So the one before the android's face, you can see it there, I had a different angle originally for the main character, and it was less about his head being in the panel, and I just felt like you didn't have the connection as much. I wanted to have more of him in the panel, to transition from kind of a close-up on him to a mid shot of the other, or a long shot of the android in the background, to transition into the close-up of his face. So I just thought it flowed better, so I did that, and I felt like it worked. So overall, there's not much that is changing on the current panel I'm working on. that's only because I think I got it's a direct copy of two panels before, but just more close up. I wanted to do that to show the positioning of the character. I wanted to have you really tell that in one panel his head is up and kind of looking at him, at the main character, and then the next one I wanted to make it apparent his head's in this machine, kind of like Christian Bale Batman, that version in Christopher Nolan's movie where he like kind of plugs in and like leans over into the Batmobile. That's kind of the angle, and that's all I need to get across. And it was coming across fine through the pencils that I had drawn previously, so there wasn't much to do as far as changing the story. Now, like I said, changing pieces of your story as you go. You know, you don't want to like have a complete redesign. Like I said, that could, I mean, you if you know what you're doing and you have a clear vision, you can go for it. But you want to stick to the thumbnails because it's going to read, relatively the same way as you planned out. And if you did that stage well, if you kind of studied the flow and you felt like you had a decent clarity in what you're trying to see in each panel, then you don't want to change too much. Only when you see that something could be added or improved upon do you want to go ahead and make a change. And as long as you're working in, especially something like working digitally in Photoshop, you're able to make these changes like super easy. So like I said, it's another reason for you to work digitally instead of traditionally. So in storytelling, as far as I'm figuring it out as I learn here, and you're pretty much seeing the process that I went through with this page, and it's essentially that you want to have the most clear image possible. And we're about to move on to the next page, and it'll become apparent a little bit here more so. So the panel after this one is a close-up, an extreme close-up of main character's eyes, in kind of surprise and not terror, but he's a little bit shocked because it's weird to have this creature thing plug into the bike. He wasn't expecting that necessarily. So previously I had that panel not be an extreme close-up at all. I had it be a mid shot, so it was the waist up, and I showed him still looking shocked, but I took too much real estate. I took almost a good chunk, like a third of the page in height and a third of the page in width, so it was almost like a decent sized chunk that didn't really need it. So in the next couple panels I split it up into two, and that way I could show a reaction and a transition from what the main character was feeling. And you'll see as I go along here, you'll see the first panel after this android plugs in is the shock, and then afterwards I do a shot of him recovering from that and kind of coming back to his fortitude and gets a more determined look, and that kind of transitions to the rest of the page where he's ready to go, ready to start the race. So by seeing that ahead of time, I roughed it out and made the changes and made the panel 2 instead of 1, and I think the story's functioning better for it because you're able to see the character close up, which is helpful in its own right because you want to see the character um, as much as possible. You know, the more real estate you give to the main character, the better. So an extreme close-up, you're going to feel real intimate with them, and that's kind of what you want out of doing you know, any story really. You know, if you don't have your main character in the forefront, you're just not going to feel and empathize with the character as much. So the close-up is good for that. And secondly, the close-up, you're able to see the expression better, and it's going to read when it's shrunken down on to whatever size page. You know, a normal comic page, it's going to read better. And a lot of the expression that happens on a person's face is the eyebrows and the eyes do a lot and show most of the expression. So that's what I focused on each of these next two panels. And at the same time, I'm trying to refine from the pencils a little bit. So it's taking a little more time because I didn't give as clean a pencil work since I did it on the fly. Right before I did these finals, I did the roughs for these couple new panels, and so I need to spend more time on the finals to figure out the look and make it look as planned as the rest of the page. And it's kind of one of the bigger rules of drawing in general for comic books, is not that you need to draw everything perfectly. It's not that you need to draw everything with a certain look, but all that matters is consistency. You can draw stick figures the whole time, and as long as you don't suddenly make your stick figure fully rendered, you're going to be fine, because everyone's going to accept that stick figure as the norm. And so the page before and all the panels before this one kind of sets the tone for everything that comes after. So I'm trying to match the polished look and the clean lines and all the rest. So consistency is the best to keep to aid your story. The best thing is just to have the most consistent look. And that brings up another thing. If you're in a position where you're not really liking your art, or it's not looking right, it's always beneficial to stay on that panel until you get it to a point where it looks natural and kind of similar to the rest of your pages and your panels, because the best way to aid your story is, one, tell what's happening in each panel clearly from one to the next sequentially, and two, putting the right panels next to each other in the right sequence, and that's its own beast, because the way you arrange your panels and what's happening in what order can give a totally different effect in the story. But what I was getting at was the consistency. No one's going to be able to pay attention to what you're doing storytelling wise if they're paying attention to how things in each panel are inconsistent. If they're noticing one panel is way more rendered than the next, or the model that you're drawing is shifting too much between panel to panel, they're going to focus on that and not focus on, they're going to be taken out of the story. They're going to be taken out of your hypnotic trance that you're trying to get them in. And a lot of storytellers describe it like that. I forget who said it best. I'll have to find the quote, but it's essentially that mainly getting your reader into a hypnotic trance through, you're pretty much leading the reader through a series of what you want to show them, and you're essentially putting them on a crazy ride, and you don't want them to realize they're on a ride. You don't want them to be taken out of it, because the minute they are, they're going to take everything at face value. Once again, they're going to see it as lines and a drawing instead of maybe something they were feeling more personally. So they're not going to focus on this person's expression that I'm drawing. They're going to focus on the quality and the and the errors in the draftsmanship. So getting off of that rant of consistency and its role in storytelling, I'm starting to do the hair, and hair is always a pain. I always have a problem getting the right flow, and there's a lot of different methods in getting hair that looks stylized and yet at the same time somewhat realistic. And yeah, you can have a whole lot of different methods, but in this method I try to like clump the hair almost in it's got like an anime kind of style because of the way I clump the hair. And not only will it make it easier for you to draw, it's also going to make it easier for the reader to look at it at first glance. And if you try to draw every hair on your character's head, it's just going to be the most detailed thing on the page, and just going to muddy up the clarity of your storytelling. And once again, you don't want to do that. So if you're running into any of those problems where you got too much detail in one area, try to notice it as you go, and see if you can edit your levels of detail as you go. So this is the panel where he's kind of freaked a little bit, and I think it's coming across well. I think it was a great decision to go from weirdness to surprise, and then have another panel where he's going to be determined and get back in the flow of things. So I'm nearing the end of the video. I'm really hoping that I didn't ramble in too many different directions. I just wanted to have a few points that really, if you want to have a great story, don't have that idea set in stone. Once it's on the page, doesn't necessarily mean it's completely done and set in stone. You can always go back and change it if you're digital, or if you're working through Lightbox and then penciling on top. So just do what's best for the story, serves the story, and you'll be fine. I'm doing my best to put out these videos, and before I go, I just wanted to address a few different things. I know I'm putting out these videos about my Star Circuit little piece here, these test pages, and I'm glad I'm doing them. However, I'm kind of moving away and working on a different type of story, something I want to address thematically that's been egging at me. So I'm moving away from this flashy kind of racing comic, and I'm hoping to show you soon what I'm working on, but it's going to be a little while. In the meantime, I'm going to do some more videos using these videos from when I worked on these pages. I just want to thank anybody who's watched the videos and either commented or liked or subscribed. Really appreciate it. I'll be putting out as many as I can, and I'm going to be working real hard to work on my own art. I hope you're working on your art, working on your dreams. I'll see you next time.